Hello YouTube, it's Birdo Prey 5, and I'm here for my Star Trek Discovery review on If Memory Serves, the 8th episode of the 2nd season. Little different, I am going to try to make this review as quick as possible. Many people have left me feedback that I tend to ramble, I get a little bit off topic, and talk slow. I already know I talk slow, so you know what? If you haven't done so already, go to YouTube, put that speed up to 1.5x speed. It'll probably save you time and make everything sound better. And with that, let me just get into it. This episode starts off very differently than any other Star Trek Discovery episode. The previously on is actually scenes taken from the original series episode The Cage, the unaired pilot that didn't air until like a decade and a half later or something. That is, of course, with Captain Pike. Now, some of those scenes did make it into the Menagerie, which was an official TOS episode, but the scenes they took from The Cage weren't the scenes from the Menagerie. These were actual scenes that were only seen in The Cage, more or less making The Cage canon. And I know there's debate over canon and whatnot, but there was always some debate whether what happened in The Cage was fully canon. Sure, it was the parts we saw in the Menagerie were canon, but now even more would technically be canon. And I only bring this up because it's going to come up later. One of the scenes we see specifically is Spock smiling. He's touching the blue plant on the surface, and it brings a smile to his face. Captain Pike's with him, so fine, no big deal. I mean, we knew about this. It's one of the reasons that just didn't make sense. Why would Spock be smiling when we knew Spock TOS would not have been smiling? At least not for a plant. You know, when Captain Kirk is alive because he thinks he's dead, he breaks a little bit of a smile, but he's not going to smile at a plant. So just keep that in mind. So yes, we get this very interesting 90-second flashback of The Cage. They did some artsy transitions, which, you know, I'm torn on, but I like the fact that they're doing something different, and the fact that they actually had to bring in, they are bringing in scenes from The Cage. Now, included in that are scenes of the original TOS Enterprise. So, I mean, they're just kind of admitting at this point that the new Enterprise that we saw earlier this season is just kind of a visual reboot, that it is supposed to be that same Enterprise we saw in this flashback, just like the Captain Pike we see in this, let's call it flashback. The Captain Pike we see in this previously on is supposed to be the Captain Pike currently serving aboard Discovery, even though they're clearly two different actors, even though Vina is a different actress. So understood, that's fine, you know, time changes, and I can, honestly, of all the problems I had with Star Trek Discovery, the shape of the Enterprise ranked very low on my list, because yeah, it's going to be updated. I don't know why they needed to do it, but they did. So, oh, and yes, I'm in my Spock blue, although to be honest, I think this is a little lighter blue than it's supposed to be, but don't worry about it. Spock blue for this episode, even though we don't see him in his TOS uniform. So, right after the Cage previously on, Captain Pike makes a personal log. Now, because of what he said, I understand it's a personal log, but man, it would have been a great opportunity to actually make a real captain's log for once. I mean, so many Star Trek episodes have started off with a captain's log, and we actually have Captain Pike here to do one but he's doing a personal log. But understood, because he talks about not trusting Section 31. In fact, he calls them a division of Starfleet. Um, so um, this is a good point to talk about the overall episode. Overall, I actually liked this episode. That said, I liked it for a Star Trek Discovery episode, and we are now 8 episodes into the second season, so we have to understand that a Star Trek Discovery episode is not going to be the same as any other Trek series episode. I've given up arguing. I've given up the fight on little things. I mean, I even big things. Okay, I'm giving up the fight on why they've changed Section 31. So, yes, if I wanted to argue all those points, I could continue to argue them, and I could continue to detract from this episode. But you know, they've made a change, and I don't have to like it, but it's better for me that at this point I just accept it. I don't have to, you know, it doesn't change what happened in the original series. It doesn't change what happened in Deep Space Nine. It doesn't change what happened in Enterprise. Taking Discovery as its own timeline, and yes, in this episode we get our first evidence that Discovery might be its own separate timeline. Taking it as its own timeline, that's the point I'm going to do reviews from now on. I'm not going to do reviews as if Discovery is in the prime or canon or whatever you want to call it timeline, because we actually get some evidence that it's not. But that said, we're going back to Section 31. Pike is having a hologram conference call with apparently the top brass at Section 31. And like, who appears to be the overall head of Section 31 is a Vulcan woman. Emphasis on Vulcan, not the woman part. That really doesn't matter. But a Vulcan. A Vulcan is head of Section 31. Also, it was like the Rainbow Coalition. We had a Tellarite, and I couldn't tell if the third character was a human, because there was 3 of them there. For no apparent reason, 3 of them were on holograms talking to Pike. But only the Vulcan woman was really saying much. The Tellarite said like a throwaway line at one point. And then there was a third person. I couldn't tell if he was just a human or another Vulcan. But either way, if anything, I mean, from what we saw in Enterprise, from what we saw in Deep Space Nine, now I know the Federation has hundreds of alien worlds, but it seemed like Section 31 was uniquely human. I mean, in Enterprise, Starfleet hadn't even existed yet, and maybe this was well, no, Starfleet existed, but the Federation hadn't existed yet. So clearly Section 31 came out of an all-human Starfleet. And I don't think that they would trust a bunch of aliens so early on in Section 31 history. I'm going to be honest. I mean, but I guess now that Section 31 is not the clandestine organization it used to be, and it's now just Starfleet intelligence, then maybe it makes sense that there are Vulcans and Tellarites and bears, oh my, as Section 31 brass. But that rubbed me the wrong way. So then Pike talks to Ash, and he wants to know because Ash sticks up for Burnham in the conversation with the Section 31 people at one point, and And Pike says, I need to know, what was the nature of your relationship with Michael Burnham. And Ash replies with actually a particularly great line, because I'll be honest, I wish I had thought of this at times when people have asked me about relationships I've had in the past. And Ash's response was, I was in love with Michael, and she was not entirely disinterested in me. A perfect summation of their on-screen romance that we saw. So that was probably Ash's best quote to date. Then we're taken to the shuttlecraft with Michael and Spock. Michael tells the shuttle to head to Talos, the Talos system, or Talos IV, and the shuttle responds by saying travel within the Talos system is prohibited by Starfleet. Now, my gut reaction was to say, wait, not only is it prohibited, it is prohibited by the death penalty. They made a big deal of that in the Menagerie, that it was the only death penalty left on the books in the Federation was traveling to Talos 4, or the Talos system, whatever. So why would they not bring that up? Why would the computer not bring up the death penalty part of this? Now, then my brain kicked in, I'll be honest. And I said, okay, maybe they just restricted it, because this happens years after. I don't know if it's 3 or 5, but it's years after the events of the cage. So maybe, we never knew, and we know the Menagerie takes place like probably a decade after this. So we just assumed that after the events of the cage, that's when they put the death penalty in place. But we have no confirmation of that. So it's entirely possible that the death penalty didn't get put in place until after the events of this episode or upcoming episodes of Discovery. So I backed off that complaint. But yeah, so the shuttle, and does the shuttle lock her out or require an authorization code? No. She just says go anyway, and the shuttle goes, which is like, shouldn't she be putting in coordinates or something? Fine, no big deal. They arrive at Talos 4, and they're greeted not by a planet, but by a black hole. And I think we all, if anybody has seen the cage, if you know what the Talosians are capable of, I think we all understood what was happening. It was an illusion, of course. So Michael, though, apparently knows of something about the Talosians, but doesn't know that they have, I guess, incredible psychic powers or powers of projection. It's unclear as to how much he really understands them. But she, of course, is trying to take the shuttle out of the black hole. But Spock, who has been catatonic up to this point, gets up, pushes her away, and jams the controls to go right to the black hole. Now, Michael then kicks him back and pushes him away, and she's like, you're crazy, we're going to die. It's a black hole. We got to go. We got to leave. And then Spock again, smacks her around and again jams the controls. And at this point, Michael gives up fighting because plot, and accepts her fate that she trusts Spock, I guess. So he's headed right for the center of the black hole. The computer is saying the ship is about to be destroyed in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And of course, just as the ship was about to be destroyed, the black hole disappears and the planet appears below. So Michael sets down. She doesn't try to hail anybody or anything. Michael sets it down in a canyon, possibly the same canyon from the cage. I'm not 100% sure. She sets it down, and now Spock is back to being catatonic again. He's not responding. He's not doing. He's just laying. He's sitting there with a half dead look on his face. And Michael says, "I've got to go out and look around." So she takes a phaser, leaves Spock alone in the shuttle, and starts looking around the planet. I mean, why did she land where she landed? Did Spock provide landing coordinates at some point? If he did, it was off camera, but whatever. She lands. She happens to land right in the exact spot she was supposed to land, I suppose. And she goes looking around, and then when she's up on a mountain looking down at the shuttle, she sees a woman walking into the shuttlecraft, a human woman. So of course she doubles back to the shuttle, and it's Vina. But Michael doesn't know who Vina is, and Vina knows who Spock is, and Vina is trying to get Spock to recognize her, but Spock is still out of it. So then Michael comes in, draws the phaser at this unarmed human woman, and points it at her, and demands to know who she is. And I don't know. Vina wasn't immediately forthcoming. She said, "So who are you?" And Michael Burnham says, "Where I come from, the person holding the phaser asks the questions." Does that sound Starfleet to you? Because I can't see Captain Picard ever saying, or even Captain Kirk for that matter, saying the person holding the phaser asks the questions. I mean, don't get me wrong, I kind of like the badassery of it, but it was completely out of character. I mean, this isn't the Wild West. It never was. If it had been the Wild West, man, this would have been a much better show. So, completely out of character. I like the line, but man, it made no sense. Especially the woman is freaking unarmed. And apparently Burnham doesn't understand that the Teleusians just do projections anyway. So it wouldn't have mattered whether she was armed or not, because there's nothing Burnham could have done about it if the Teleusians wanted to fight. So Vina explains the situation, gives them beaming coordinates. Michael sets the computer to beam her and Spock, and only her and Spock, to the underground cave where the Teleusians are. She completely leaves Vina on the shuttle, ignoring the fact, not knowing, at this point she does not know Vina is just a projection. She thinks Vina is a real person. So why would you not transport all three of them down and leave her on the shuttle alone? That makes no real sense, but fine. So they transport down, they get in the Teleusian cave, and Vina walks in. And this is when Michael first realizes, and she says, "Oh my God, are you real?" And then she kind of explains, "I'm as real as I need to be." And the Teleusians appear, and Michael realizes that they're all projections. At this point, we start to see... Oh, okay, wait, before this. Right before Spock goes catatonic, when they're landed on the shuttle, when they've landed on the shuttle, Michael Burnham says, "We are really through the looking glass here." And Spock just does this eye roll of disgust, like he's so sick and tired and fed up with Michael Burnham and her references to Alice in Wonderland and just her shit in general, that he is finally the character that stands up to Burnham somewhat. And for that, I'll be honest, I came into this episode thinking I was going to hate hipster Spock. But you know what? He's not Spock. But whoever he is, granted, I like him. I like him. I don't hate him. I actually like the character. Does he seem like... do I even have 1% of the believability that he becomes the character that Leonard Nimoy played? Absolutely not. At least in the J.J. Abrams films, I could believe that Zachary Quinto was young Spock. Okay? Much better job in casting, in my opinion. This guy, he's got a good voice. He's got a good... The attitude has issues, and I'll get to it. But I like him. Again, that this is a different timeline, I like the guy. He's not as bad as I thought he would be, by any means. So then we go to like we'll call the A plot Michael Burnham and Spock on Talos, where the walls fell, which somebody left a comment on my earlier. I did a quick review of the first 90 seconds of the show late last night, and yes, somebody left that comment. I'm using it. Whoever you were, I apologize, I forgot your name, but Mikey Spock and Michael Burnham on Talos IV, when the walls fell. But honestly, the walls didn't fall this time, but it was just fun to say. So the A plot is Spock and Burnham. The B plot is Pike and Section 31. And the C plot, and this is another one we're going to have to almost eat my words, but it's Stamets and the Doctor, played by renowned man-baby Wilson Cruz, who blocked me on Twitter without having ever interacted with me. But I have to say, as little respect as I have for you, Wilson Cruz, the actor, as the person who blocks people on Twitter preemptively because you can't deal with perhaps criticism you think you might possibly receive, and your terribly bigoted statements that you've made on Twitter. The actor, the character of Dr. Colner, I believe it is, Colder, whatever it is, the Doctor. Goddamn, you were a badass this episode, and I really liked it. But there's a serious issue with timing with Stamets and the Doctor. In this episode, and now you have to understand, and at least one, if not two episodes have taken place. At least the one, since the Doctor's come back to life. But in this episode, and a star date was given at the beginning of the episode, that Michael Burnham has already been gone and away from the ship for some time. So we know this episode takes place after Michael Burnham has left the ship. You know, at least the entire previous episode has taken place before this episode. And yet, we're supposed to believe that the very first time back in the quarters, Stamets, Paul Stamets, and brings Dr. whatever to his quarters, and he's giving him the tour, and he's 100% like, isn't it good to be home again? And this is the first time he's been home. And like, wow. Yeah, this is a good scene. It should have been in last week's episode. Or maybe even the episode before that. What the hell is it doing here? They had to have been home. Stamets was in last week's episode. What the hell were they doing for the hours and hours between the previous episodes? It makes no sense. So there's a missing time element here that annoys the heck out of me. But yeah, things are not good. Stamets and the Doctor are not having a good, are not enjoying their time. Well, Stamets is trying to, but the Doctor, he does not want to be in a relationship anymore. And we'll get back to it, because just understand at this point that things are not going well. They get back to the quarters, and the Doctor's kind of weirded out by the fact that Stamets never threw out any of his things or got rid of any of his things, because clearly Stamets couldn't come to terms with the fact he was dead. Now, how long was he dead for? Was it a week? Was it a month? Was it 6 months? I honestly don't know. I don't know if anyone knows. I mean, honestly, if it was a couple of weeks or even a month or two, it's not that unusual to not throw out somebody's stuff, the minute they die, if you don't have to. Especially if you were sharing quarters with them, you want to be reminded of them. You don't want to throw everything away right away. That's not healthy either. Eventually you pick what you want to keep, but you probably do get rid of some stuff. But I don't even know that was really an issue. Okay, now here was probably one of my biggest, if not the biggest, issue with this. We're back on the bridge. And okay, so section 31, basically they don't want Pike looking for Michael and Spock. So Georgiou had to come up with a reason of keeping, that's another thing. But Georgiou had to come up with a reason for keeping Discovery from searching for Michael and Spock. And so Georgiou says that they need to stay where they are and scan the debris to try and figure out what the probe was and what it was doing, how, everything about the probe. Which honestly is a good idea. You would think they would have been doing that anyway. A probe from 500 years in the future destroys your shuttle. You shouldn't need an order from Section 31 to recover the debris and try to figure out what happened, right? I mean, that's probably an important thing to do. But no, apparently that wasn't what they were going to do. Anyway, so fine. But I want to go back real quick. In the beginning, when Section 31, Section 31's three admirals or whatever they were, they'd spoken to Pike, but then they also spoke to Leland and Georgiou on the Section 31 ship. In fact, I think that was first, and they said that it's very, very important that they track down Spock and Burnham, and it's really, really important. And but they called Georgiou, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing her name. Is it Giorgio or Georgiou? Whatever it is. They call her Captain Georgiou. Why? Doesn't Section 31 know she's from the Mirror Universe? She's not Captain Georgiou. I can understand calling her Captain Georgiou around Pike and people who might not know that she's from the Mirror Universe, but Captain Leland, clearly knows she's from the Mirror Universe. I would imagine all of Section 31 knows who she truly is. So why would they call her Captain Georgiou? I don't know. that confused me. But let's move on. So yes, the biggest scene, and as a computer coder, programmer, as someone who codes and does computer programming and has used databases, in particularly SQL databases, for decades. MS SQL, MySQL. SQL stands for Structured Query Language. It is it's a computer language used when you make databases, and like huge databases that hold billions of records even, but mostly thousands to hundreds of thousands to millions of records. And there's a thing, a way of hacking a database. If the code of the program is poorly written, you can do what's called an SQL injection. And just real simple. Let's say you're on a web page and you're going from page 3 to page 4. So when you go to page 4, there's actually sending the number 4 to the database in a line of SQL code. And it'll be like select star from content where page equals 4. Okay? And you do that and you get everything that's supposed to be on the 4th page. Easy enough. But if somebody, a bad person or a hacker or whatever, if they can actually edit the web page in their browser or use browser tools, that instead of sending the number 4 to the website, they can actually send where it equals number 4, and then they could send a character for another statement, or they could do a sub-statement. And then instead of sending the select from page 4, just, I mean, it doesn't make sense that they would do it because they'd just be an a-hole to do it, but they could instead say select 4. They could do a sub-statement, select where page equals 4, and then they could also include a statement and delete the entire database, for example. Or they could send a statement and change administrator password to 12345. If they have an idea how the database is set up, they can absolutely do that. If the database, if the software has been poorly coded. Now, a correctly coded piece of software would always check the user's input coming from a web page or a computer terminal for whatever reason, like a bank software. Even though it's not on a web page, they are most definitely checking that when you send a command to an ATM to withdraw money, there is, I have no doubt, some type of sanity check that if the number is over $500 or something, it checks that it's a number, and B, if the number is over a certain amount, it disallows it. It breaks it, it sends an error or something like that. So this is very basic stuff. And even today, there's software packages that mitigate the SQL injection possibilities by scanning all inputs sent by web browsers and other software. And if they see anything like a word that says select or insert, any of the words reserved for databases, they immediately either stop the transaction or they do something to limit the possibility of the SQL injection actually working. So, and I know that was a long one, but I hope if you have no idea what an SQL injection is, you have some idea. But the robot lady on the bridge Pike asks her how he's making out with the database, that alien database, I believe, or the probe database, whichever one it was. And I think it was a probe database, now that I think about it. And she says something like she scanned for SQL injections, but so far they found no exploitable files. And I almost fell off my hospital bed laughing. Just to say that. I mean, they're on the most advanced spaceship we've ever seen. Their computers can learn, apparently. Their computers are just a few years away from gaining sentience. And they are still using SQL? I mean, I don't know how to... It's oversimplified, but it would be very similar to them saying, I Control-Alt-Deleted, and it still wouldn't reboot the server or the ship's computer. Like, we need to, Pike orders, Control-Alt-Delete, let's reboot the system. I mean, it is absurd to think that they are still using anything that they would still call SQL in the year 22, whatever this is, and that not only would they be using SQL, but it would still be susceptible to SQL injections. I mean, this is stuff that what they call a script kiddie, the first time hackers who are looking at like the crappiest of the crappiest software trying to exploit. They look for this stuff and they find it, because occasionally they are there. I mean, humans do make mistakes. But there is no reason to think SQL exploits would still be a thing by the time we get to Star Trek Discovery's decade. I would be surprised if 20 years from now SQL exploits are still a thing. We are making advances that fast. I'd probably be surprised if 10 years from now there's still something we have to worry about. But I will say 20 just to be safe. So yeah, that completely ridiculous statement, and it made me laugh like hell. So next, we're back to the shuttle. Now they are jumping between the A, B, and C plots all over this episode. Back to the shuttle, and they just landing. Okay, so I guess I was a little out of. I said some things earlier that took place out of sync, but the shuttle lands on Talos with Michael, and right before she gets out to go exploring, it tells her the atmospheric breakdown, which was cool. I mean, but I don't think I've ever heard the shuttle announce the atmospheric breakdown of the planet before. I mean, it just says if it's class M or sustainable for life. This time we actually got the percentage of all the gases in the atmosphere, and I gotta say my spidey sense started tingling when they claimed that the CO2 percentage in the atmosphere was 4.6%. And I was gonna look this up, but let's check. Yeah, that's what I was afraid of. Okay, a 4.6%, 6.4%, 4.6% of carbon dioxide as part of the atmosphere would probably be toxic. Um, I, for comparison, the percentage of carbon dioxide on Earth, we're talking, is in the hundreds of parts per million. So it's like 0.1% or 0.01%. No, probably like 0.1% of Earth's atmosphere or less. I think it's even less. I think it's closer to 0.05% of Earth's atmosphere. So I don't know if they just bungled, had the wrong decimal place, or they don't understand how breathing works. But a 4.6% carbon dioxide atmosphere, that would probably kill you, I would guess. Because if your carbon dioxide balance goes off, I mean, bad things happen to you. I have issues with my carbon dioxide balance, and it is barely, sorry about the beeping. It's my hospital bed. And it's barely a percentage or two out of norm, and it's already an issue for me. So yeah, I can't imagine breathing an atmosphere that's 4.6%. So when they meet the Talosians, and Michael realizes that Spock brought her there, brought himself there, brought her there, because he knew that the Talosians were the only people that could help him see what solve his mental issues. So, but we get a very, very weird request, because up until this point, I was like, when we left the Talosians after the cage, yes, they were a-holes for bringing and trying to keep them on the planet. But by the end of the cage, we kind of felt a little bad for them, and they didn't seem like a-holes anymore. And for this, and by the menagerie, they damn well seemed like heroes almost, in that they were giving Captain Pike a physical life back. But in this episode, so I came to think, the Talosians are actually probably good guys, misunderstood but good guys. But very, very weird requests they make. They do say that they will help Spock, but only they say that Michael must pay a price, and the price she must pay is to show them her memory of what really happened back between her and Spock that caused the Great Rift. And yes, I'm using paper. That caused the Great Rift between her and Spock. Why? From everything we know about the Talosians, they already know everything that Michael has ever thought in her life. They should know. They should not need her permission to relive her memory. But for the purposes of plot, that's where we are. Now, this is interesting. Spock is telling Michael, because now, apparently in the presence of the Talosians, he can talk more. About the first time the Red Angel came to him. I guess these are his memories we're seeing. And he says he first came to him as a child. And it was after she had left home. She had run away from home. And Spock is in his bed, and the Red Angel came to him when he was sleeping. And the Red Angel showed Spock Michael's death, which had yet to happen. But Michael is running through the forest, that there shouldn't even be a forest, the forests of Vulcan, being chased by that Vulcan creature that's very, very dangerous. We've seen in Enterprise, we've seen in, I believe we saw in the animated series. Anyway, this thing just eats people. Certainly it eats children. And we actually see in the memory that was shared with Spock, Michael's actually killed. So there is a timeline where Michael is killed and after she ran away from home. So let me say, that was her fate. He says that was her fate. So if that timeline was the prime timeline that we know, or what we've always called the prime timeline, the TOS, TNG, and so on timeline, I could completely understand Spock never bringing up the foster sister that was killed as a child. It'd be a painful memory even for Vulcan, and there'd be no logic in sharing the story because why? She's dead. So I could totally understand if that had happened, why we never hear about Mikey Spock again. But even if that was the case, none of that would be responsible for all the other changes in the timeline that we've seen in Discovery. So it's a good start to perhaps fixing problems, but it is a long, long way from where we need to be. Anyway, so then the next, Spock says the next time the Red Angel came to him was just a few months ago, and it shared another memory. And this memory was pretty wild. It looked like the same technology that had made the probes were coming into, I don't know if it was the galaxy or just the various systems, Earth, Andoria, some of the other planets. I couldn't tell. Honestly, I couldn't even recognize Earth. All these planets looked pretty similar except for Andoria, which had rings. I couldn't recognize what planet was which. So that was pretty crappy. Even though they looked good, they all looked alien. I had no way to know what planet was which. And apparently these probes could just impact into a planet and literally destroy the entire planet. So it looked like these mechanical probe robots were destroying all the planets in the galaxy. And Spock says, yes, so this is a possible timeline that he's seen, and that they could be destroying all sentient life in the galaxy. Of course, then he says millions of lives are at risk. Well, Spock, if they're destroying all sentient life in the galaxy, certainly billions and billions are at risk. Probably hundreds of billions. I don't know what the population of the galaxy is. I'm not sure anyone does, but I know it's more than millions. Okay, even millions would be more than what's on Earth, not even counting Vulcan, Andoria, Kronos, Talon, or Talos IV, and all the other places. So yeah, a little weird that you only said millions there. Then there's one of the best scenes of the episode, and it is Spock and Michael having a bit of an argument, and it was right after one of these visions, and I think Michael asked him who or what was the Red Angel, something like that. And Spock says, I don't know. If I knew, we wouldn't be here. And Michael says it was a rhetorical question. No, Michael, that's not a rhetorical question. If it was a rhetorical question, it was the worst rhetorical question ever. Why would you even ask that? So, they get into a bit of a spat back and forth. Spock actually seems to put Michael in her place a couple of times, and then she ends it. Right. Like, do you have a better question you want to ask? And finally, she says yes. She says, "Do you think that beard is working for you?" And that was funny. That was legit funny. Spock is like kind of taken aback, and he kind of like he doesn't answer. But yeah, so they do bring up the fact that he has a beard, and that he probably shouldn't. So I guess Michael's the one that eventually gets him to shave again, I assume. Although I haven't seen any pictures of him shaven in the series. I don't know if he actually does or not, but yes, that was brought up. Then we get a scene where Stamets and the Doctor are back in their quarters, and Stamets comes in almost like with a rolling cart from like, I don't know what. Like he brought it from the mess hall or something, I suppose. And he's like, "Dinner is served. It's your favorite." Some type of soup or something. I don't know. And he says, "Computer, play music." Which is fine. I mean, I already tell Alexa to play music sometimes. No! Not now, Alexa. Cancel. Right. So, fine. It seemed a bit weird, but you could tell the Doctor was not into it. And they have a big fight. Well, the Doctor's like, "Yeah, I remember this was my favorite, but it's not me anymore. I remember having the memory of liking it, but I can't connect to anything." And so, yeah, that you can tell things are going to get worse for the Doctor and Stamets before they get better. And this is actually the scene where they talk about Stamets never throwing out his things. So then back to Spock and Michael. Spock, they have another great back and forth, and Michael's trying to make this all about her, and Spock says he's not here to absolve her, and she's like, "But I am whatever," and Spock's like, "It's funny you see it that way, that she's making everything about her." And in fact, she says that she brought Spock there, and Spock correctly points out that no, I brought you here. And it's true. He did. He made the coordinates. Yeah, she figured it out. She did get the shuttle, but she wouldn't be there without Spock. So, you know what? Who brought who? It's arguable. Then we're back at the Doctor, who's in the turbo lift. We get an overhead view of him in the turbo lift. For some reason, this turbo lift scene, it looks like the smallest turbo lift I've ever seen. You would be hard pressed to fit 2 or 3 people shoulder to shoulder in the turbo lift, where we've seen, now maybe there are different size turbo lifts on Discovery for some reason, but I mean, we saw one turbo lift with like 8 people in it, right? When that lizard guy sneezed on the guy who ended up being killed for mansplaining, the guy who was wearing a blue shirt, by the way. Yeah, that was a huge turbo lift. It probably could have fit 10 people. This picture, I'd be surprised if that turbo lift fit 3 adults comfortably. And the apparently turbo lift brings the Doctor to the mess hall. He's here. Oh, earlier he saw Ash. The Doctor saw Ash for the first time because he was waiting for a turbo lift. Apparently, they live on the same deck. Ash Tyler Ash Tyler. Ash, or Tyler, whatever, or Vok. He lives on the same deck of the ship, and apparently not too far away from Stamets's quarters. Because nobody thought before this, hey, maybe we should move the quarters of the guy who killed the other guy. No, nobody thought about that. So yeah, so he saw him, but he didn't. I mean, they made eye contact, but there was no actual confrontation yet. So the doctor had been really pissed off at Stamets, and Stamets is like, "Why are you so angry with me?" And he's like, "You know what? That's a good question. I don't know." And that's when he goes storming out the door. And we see now he's storming out to go to the mess hall. I guess he finally wants to confront Ash. And he's in total badass mode. And I mean, for the Doctor who to this point played such a gentle and caring character, to see him, and he was believably looked like a guy I did not want to piss off. I mean, he is a small guy, don't get me wrong, but if I could see people being legit afraid of him in his angry ass mindset. And he comes in the mess hall. Oh, excuse me, sorry about that. He comes into the mess hall. That made the whole pillow visible. Oh well. Sneezes. Okay. He comes into the mess hall, starts tossing plates over, starts tossing things around, walks up to Ash, smacks his whole table out of the way, and he's like, "Bring Vok out." And Ash is like, "I can't do it. It doesn't work that way." And he's like, "I'll find him." And he just starts going to town to pound on Ash. And Ash holds his own, and let's face it, by all rights, Ash should have beat the shit out of the Doctor. But I suppose Ash is purposely not fighting back as hard as he could because he does feel guilty, tremendously guilty. But here's the point. The mess hall is full. And not only is it full, Saru is there with Tilly. But Saru, the second in command, almost captain. I mean, what happened to them being co-captains? But whatever. Second in command. So basically the first officer. So say Commander Riker is in the mess hall, and two crew members get into a fist fight. And Tilly and other people were going to go over and stop them from fighting. And do they call for security or anything? No. Saru's like, "Nope, don't do anything. This must be allowed to play out." Which, you know what, Saru? Absolutely right. It was probably the best thing he could do, was let them fight it out. And it kind of resolved when the Doctor realized he just couldn't get to Ash. He couldn't get to Vok. And the Doctor tells him at the end, he's like, "I don't even know who I am anymore." And Ash is like, "Yeah, tell me about it," or something. "Who do you think you're talking to?" And I guess the Doctor realizes that of all the people on the ship, Ash/Vok probably is the closest to him in not knowing what he's talking about, who he is, who he truly is. I mean, because Ash has a second personality in him or something. We still don't know how or why that happened, the specifics. We probably never will. But I think the Doctor finally realized that he wasn't going to get any satisfaction by beating the crap out of Ash. And so he leaves. Actually he sits down and just pouts. So the next scene is Saru with Pike on another relatively small turbo lift, and Pike is like, so I heard there was a confrontation and you used some, I don't know, he didn't say unorthodox, but unusual method or something. And Saru's like, well, you know, there's no guidelines. There's no guidelines on a confrontation between a crew member who had his bones, who had a Klingon grafted onto his bones, and a crew member who's come back from the dead. The way he delivers that line, come back from the dead, it just seemed like there was something much more dramatic going on. But I don't know if it was a bad edit or what. But Pike says basically, listen, I'm going to overlook it this time, but from now on, no, you gotta put the word out there. We're not going to solve our problems with violence. We're going to solve them with a uniform code of conduct. And Saru agrees to do that. So then Pike is in his ready room, and Vina shows up. Vina spooks him. Vina appears next to him, and he looks and he jumps back, because how the hell is Vina, on his ship? And they're nowhere near Talos IV. And Vina is like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not used to you being afraid of me." And this is the beginning, and just to save all the build up, basically, and I don't know why this was important to tell us, but Vina basically has had, even though Captain Pike left Talos, the Talosians made an image of Pike, an illusionary Pike, who has been Vina's boyfriend or husband, mate, whatever. So even though he's just a projection of what Pike was, she's basically been with Pike the entire time. Somebody who looks like Pike but isn't really Pike. I don't know why it was important for us to piece that together, but they were laying the groundwork for that, and they slowly make that obvious throughout the episode. What it adds to the episode, I do not know. Then Stamets and the doctor are in the mess hall, and there's all these little robots flying around. I was like, what the hell is going on here? This totally, I didn't understand this scene at all. Since when do little robots fly around the mess hall? I'm guessing Jet Reno is somewhere on the ship making flying robots for no reason, and they just fly around the mess hall. I don't get it. Anyway, there's the official breakup scene. Stamets and the doctor have broken up. The doctor wants to move on with his life, and he wants Stamets to move on with his life. And that's that. Then, anyway, so Vina tells Pike that they have to get to Talos IV as soon as possible. And Talosians are projecting, and they project Burnham and Spock. So they explain to Pike what's happened. And also, as we all knew, Spock didn't actually kill anyone. That was just a lie made up by Section 31. He jiu-jitsu'd, punched someone in the neck, and he nerve pinched someone else, and he hit someone else. Everybody got knocked out, but nobody was dead. So clearly those were just lies made up by Section 31 to get to Spock. But then to get to Talos, what do? They have Stamets report to engineering they're about to use the spore drive. How do you use the spore drive? Didn't we learn like 3 episodes ago? Every time they use the spore drive, it's destroying the mycelial network. That it rains destruction. I mean that May ghost was telling them about how terrible things are since they started using the spore drive. Wasn't that the reason they had to stop using spore drive, or at least we thought it was? They were all ready to fire up the spore drive. I guess to hell with the mycelial network. It's more important they get to Talos faster. And here's the thing. They couldn't use it because it's been sabotaged. And further, apparently it wasn't all that far away anyway, because instead they just go to it at warp. Now, yeah, they say they're headed to a starbase that's nearby, and they're going to make a turn at the last second so that Section 31 doesn't realize what they're doing, but of course Section 31 knows what they're doing anyway. But yeah, I really don't understand why they were about to use the spore drive. So now that they know the spore drive has been sabotaged, earlier in the show, we're told that from Saru that somebody has sent a huge transmission to an unknown location. Petabytes of data has been sent, and he doesn't know who sent it. And Pike is like, well, figure it out. And Saru's like, we will. So on the bridge, now that they find out that it's been sabotaged, they're like, well, who would sabotage it? And of course, Ash is on the bridge. And the woman who came from Enterprise, the Benzonite or whatever she is, with the things on her face, she initially goes right to accusing Ash, and basically everybody's accusing Ash. Nobody trusts him, and he's like, I didn't do it, I swear. And now Saru comes out and says there was also an unexplained data transmission of lots of, petabytes of data, unauthorized transmission, and it was your authorizations code that authorized it. Now, if he had an authorization code that authorized it, how is it an unauthorized transmission? But I'm not even going to dwell on that because there's not going to be a solid answer. The point is, Ash is clearly being set up. And we know he's clearly being set up by the robot lady, because all through this episode, the robot lady has still been acting weird. And she would have the ability to fake who sent the transmission. So, without a doubt, the robot lady is the one who actually sabotaged the drive and everything. Anyway, and then Pike takes, based on no provable evidence, Pike says, well, we can't trust you right now. So he confines Ash to his quarters, and he takes his super secret, super fancy Section 31 badge off his chest. Like he can't have it. Because, he might contact Section 31 or God knows what. So, why would a Section 31 operative let Pike take a very fancy and advanced piece of technology that he shouldn't even be allowed to have? Why wouldn't he fight that or put up, And B, Ash yells, he's like, they're going to find a way to track you anyway. And I'm thinking, you goddamn right they're going to track you. You're holding in your hand a tracking device. That badge can be tracked, no doubt. So why don't you beam it into space or something? But they don't. They don't. They could have vaporized it. So now back to the Spock and Michael plot. They've seen all the memories that Spock he needs to see. The Red Angel was from the future. That's all he knows. A human from the future. Despite there being wearing some type of a quantum suit that blocked all signals except some telepathy, except mind melds apparently. Spock has no idea who was in the suit, only that he could tell it was a human who was very, very lonely. So again, it looks like a woman, so it wouldn't make sense for it to be old Spock. Could it be Burnham? I mean, I guess that's the most logical. I don't know who it's going to be. I'm not gonna make a guess. So then we find out Michael has to give her memory over to the Talosians for some reason, and so we finally get the big reveal that we knew could not possibly live up to expectations of what did Michael Burnham do to Spock that made Spock hate her or despise her or kill him. And we get to see the night that Michael was running away, Spock, the kid Spock, toddler Spock, is stopping her and says, no, you can't leave. And she's like, I have to. The Vulcan extremists, apparently Vulcan extremists are a major issue on Vulcan, that they're going to hurt Spock. They're going to hurt the whole family if she doesn't leave. And Spock's like, you mean our family? And he's like, we'll fight them together. And he's like, you know, he's the innocence of a child. And she's a few years older than him and smarter. And, you know, she's doing things for a logical reason that she doesn't want to see them get hurt. But to get Spock, because Spock is like, well, then I'm going to follow you. I'm going to go with you. And clearly she can't allow that. So to get Spock to not come with her, she has to make up a bunch of stuff about how she doesn't like him and that he's never going to be human. And he's like, but you said you were going to teach me ways of human and we were going to live on Earth together. And Spock had all these dreams of moving to Earth with Michael. A little disturbing. And finally, the big one, that the straw that broke Spock's mind, apparently, or caused his breakdown as a kid. She called him a weird little half-breed. She's like, don't you get it, you weird little half-breed? I don't want you as my brother. And she goes storming off into the night, and Spock is left devastated. And although that clearly had to happen before the Red Angel comes to Spock and shows Spock Burnham's death, and clearly Spock was very disturbed by seeing Burnham killed, and that he immediately went to his parents and told them where to find Burnham in the forest so she doesn't get killed. Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense that he would be hating Burnham, but also be ready to save her life, and be so mentally upset by the fact that she was going to possibly be killed. So yeah. Then the weirdest scene of the movie. Section 31 ship followed Discovery to Talos IV. Why didn't the Talosians use their black hole illusion to scare away the Section 31 ship? Plot, I suppose. Plot reasons. Anyway, they're both in orbit. They both try to get a lock on Michael and Spock. And they both get the lock at the same time. And the computer realizes they can't beam them up. So one of the ships has to let go of the lock. So Leland comes on screen and demands that Pike let go of the transporter lock, or it's going to destroy everything, or it's going to just kill them all. It's going to kill them both because he's not going to let go. And so Uh, so yeah, so basically, of course, at that time, uh, Vina shows back up. Of course, only Pike can see her, and come tons of lens flare at this point, the most lens flare I've ever seen. Vina comes up behind Pike and says, "You got to let them go." Of course, she's speaking in riddles. She could have just said what she meant was that let go of the transporter lock. We're going to do the illusion that they're beaming up to the ship, but they'll really come up by shuttlecraft to you. But no, she has to speak in riddles. Fine, Pike lets go of the transporter lock. And then they apparently beam onto the Section 31 ship. And Michael and Spock, and this is the scene that we have here that I chose, because all Section 31 has put all their guns up to aim at them, and now they're trying to get answers from them. And I beamed back, and nobody's answering the questions. And then Burnham says something. Liam says it'd go easier if you answer, and Burnham's like, I don't think so, or something. And then he's like, what's going on here? And Michael, now this was a bit of humor, but at a section where there was no humor was needed or even should exist. Michael says, say goodbye, Spock. And Spock goes and he puts up his Vulcan hand that I can't do so well. And instead of saying live long and prosper, of course he says goodbye, Spock. Because Michael said, say goodbye, Spock. So he says goodbye, Spock. And they just disappear. And Leland doesn't understand what happened. Of course, Georgiou seems to know exactly what happened, because she's dealt with Talosians before in her universe. And she said the first time they did a illusion on her, she just destroyed them all. So they get back to the Discovery, and this is the final scene, and Spock comes out and sees Pike and Burnham, and they're talking a bit, and Spock's like, it's good to be back. And I'm sorry, Sassy. Anyway, they get back to the ship, and Spock is smiling, and Pike like, Spock, is that a smile on your face? And he says, yeah, I believe it is. So why would Pike be surprised Spock was smiling when they went out of their way to show us in the opening credits Spock was smiling on Talos? When he was touching the plants, he was smiling. Pike should know a Spock that does smile. It shouldn't be surprising to him that Spock smiles, but it is. So I don't know why, but I'll be honest. In all, I liked this episode. I liked Spock's attitude. I liked Spock a lot more than I thought I would. Probably the best episode of Discovery to date. I hesitate to give it a number because I know it will change. If I had to give it a number, I'd give it an 8 of 10. It is very, very good for a Discovery episode. But I have to admit that my Discovery scale, I can't pretend the Discovery scale is the same as the scale I would use for any other Trek show. Especially now that we know there's other timelines involved. So, divorcing Discovery from all other Treks, this was maybe our best episode to date. And I actually liked it. I don't know, maybe it's Stockholm Syndrome. I don't know what it is, but not terrible. though if history repeats itself, the fact this week's episode was good, next week's episode will be bad. But we'll see. I hope it's not. I hope it's not. Next week we see that the robot lady finally starts kicking ass, and they realize she's not who she pretended to be, or that whatever the bad programming in her finally comes to the surface. Oh, and they visit Section 31 headquarters, which seems to be a space station. So yeah, that's what we have to look forward to. So thank you all. Yes, this took a lot longer than I thought it would. A lot longer. I hope to do a shorter one. I hope you enjoy my reviews. I know many of you prefer it when I hate the show, but I got to be honest, I did not hate this episode. It had good things, not enough to join CBS All Access, but if you get it for free, go ahead and watch this one. Take care. Qapla. Thank you all for watching my video. Please remember to comment, like, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that bell icon. Without it, you won't get notifications of new videos. If you want to visit me, check out my forum at juot.net. I'm also on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, and Gab. And if you're really crazy, you can send me some money on PayPal. Take care.